from London to Tokyo. As you did see there, it is sunrise here in the U.S., but the sun is setting on the first full day of competition at the pandemic-delayed Olympic Games.
Yeah, COVID-19 still, of course, looming large over everything here. And here's a new number. At least 127 people linked to the Olympics have now tested positive. One match has even been canceled, and that challenge is compounded now. Get this, Candace, a tropical storm is now threatening to disrupt the competition.
Next, the cicadas are going to be there. NBC's Stephanie Goss joining us right now to kick off our coverage from Tokyo. Stephanie, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning to you guys. You know, it hardly seems fair, right? This country grappling with the pandemic, having to delay these games for a year. And now a possible cyclone? Well, right now it's a tropical storm. It's called Napartak. And if it does strengthen and come here, it will reach Tokyo on Tuesday or skirt it. But they're already concerned about some of the effects. They are rescheduling the rowing that was supposed to begin on Monday. These are the eights that were supposed to row on Monday. They're now going to row tomorrow instead. And you know, the forecast is still uncertain, as these storms are, but there are some growing concerns. Back on the issue of COVID, which will continue to be a story throughout these games. You mentioned the number 127, and I keep on reminding people that it's important to put this in context with the thousands of people that are accredited for these games. So that's 127 among the tens of thousands of people that have accreditation for the games. The positivity rate within that group then is really low, 0.02, less than 0.02%. So we haven't seen the kind of spike that officials were concerned about. There is one small pocket with the Czech Republic team that has drawn some concern. That delegation has said they are investigating a possible charter flight problem. And they flew over here that the local press says a doctor on board that flight was not vaccinated and may have spread the virus to a number of coaches and other people and athletes on that flight. Among them, these beach volleyball players who have now said they couldn't compete today and they've had to forfeit their match. This really could be the beginning of you know, a string of competitions that are affected because of COVID. People certainly have their eyes open. But, you know, the competitions began today, 23 sports, 11 gold medals. The first one was given to a Chinese shooter, 1 gold. I think actually China has won a couple of golds today. And Jill Biden's going to go and see some of the events today, including the soccer match. The U.S. women have to kind of redeem themselves after a brutal loss against Sweden. They lost 3-0 the other night, so they've got a lot to prove tonight. Guys?
Stephanie, I know you're under strict quarantine rules, too. You're only allowed to leave your hotel for a 15-minute walk every day. How many more days until you can maybe explore Tokyo a little bit?
Oh, God, I wish it was right now, to be honest. I have this beautiful view over my shoulder. All I want to do is go find some restaurants and walk the streets, and unfortunately, I can't. Understandably, I cannot. I have about another week or so on my quarantine, and, you know, we've been doing as much as we can going out with these 15-minute walks. I had the opportunity to go on a boat tour that was government-sponsored. They've done a couple of those kinds of tours for the media who are dealing with the quarantine, but we get it. We understand the restrictions. We want to keep everyone as safe as possible. Guys, back to you.
Stir crazy.
Even though I need to get some sushi.
So it's quarantine, not prison. You're in a bubble, but not necessarily stuck in one location. Great to hear, at least.
True. All right, Stephanie Goss, thanks so much. Joining us right now is somebody who knows that the struggles here and the shadow that COVID is playing all too well. U.S. volleyball player Taylor Crabb, who tested positive for COVID as a vaccinated person while in Japan. We're going to bring in sports reporter from New York Times, Ken Belson, in just a couple of minutes, who's covering the Olympics in Tokyo. But Taylor, first to you. I can't imagine how disappointed you are. You're watching the opening ceremony in quarantine. Are you still asymptomatic, and what happens, and how are you feeling about all of this?
Well, obviously I'm devastated. That's the biggest one. Tried to take all the right steps to get me here and to get me here safely and to be able to perform and go out for my country, but I guess that's how this is the hand I was dealt, and I'm trying to deal with it as best as I can. I've had a tremendous amount of support from obviously my family and friends, but all my fans and everybody's been a really big help for me.
And Taylor, we know you're devastated. Could only imagine the level of devastation. But you have been so brave in saying that you're going to support your partner in whatever way you can from the sidelines. But take us back to how all of this happened. Obviously, you were vaccinated. Where did you get tested, and when did you find out? And when you first found out about that positive test, what kind of emotions did you go through at that point?
Yeah, so 4 and 3 days before we flew, we had to get tested, and they were both negative. So my first test was when we landed in Japan at the airport. And they actually didn't tell me right away. They looked at me, they asked my name, and they separated me from everyone else while we were getting our bags. And, right then when they separated me, I was in, disbelief. I knew that was kind of the reason why, but they never told me that you were tested positive. It kind of took them about, I think, an hour to actually tell me I was positive. And then they took me to the village at a fever clinic to get a PCR test, and that one was positive too. And then since then, I've been in isolation.
Taylor, you've been training and waiting for this for 5 years. You dealt with the pandemic and quarantine and still keeping up, being Olympics ready here. You're certainly not alone in having to sit out. Your brother, in fact, is arguing that you should be able to because you're asymptomatic. I mean, what do you think about some of his comments, and do you have any resentment about the fact that the games are going on when it feels like one athlete after another, match after match, are being impacted by this?
I mean, no matter what you believe, that's my brother. I love him for having my back. I need that support right now. And, this is uncharted waters for everybody. Nobody knows how to go about this, really, and we're all trying our best. I want to thank Japan and the IOC for continuing on with this and trying their best to keep us all healthy and safe.
All right. Taylor, hang on right there, because I do want to bring into the conversation Ken Belson. Because, Ken, the International Olympic Committee did not require athletes to be fully vaccinated to take part in the games. Do you think that they regret that decision at this point?
I think they should. I think that the vaccines have proven in a wide number of settings to be effective, to at least reduce the risk. And it only takes one person to spread the risk or put people into quarantine because of close contacts. I don't know how they would have done it with the number of countries and the lack of vaccine supply in many places in the world. But it should have been a fairly low bar. They could have acquired more vaccines on their own and distributed them much earlier in the process. And unfortunately, we're now paying the price for some of that.
Ken, Stephanie walked us through some of the cancellations so far, including women's beach volleyball. They have reportedly at least 4 positive cases on their team. Do you anticipate this happening more and more, and how ultimately could that impact the games?
Well, this is an unusual circumstance. I covered the NFL normally. Last season, when the players came back unvaccinated, there were many cases when everybody arrived from around the country. So I think it's sort of natural you'll see a lot of positive cases at the beginning. The problem with the Olympics is the events happen in staggered format, and so if you're not ready for the first 3 days or 4 days of the Olympics, that's it. There's no long season to go through and recover. People will, unfortunately, I went to weightlifting today. Those weightlifters have literally 2 hours to participate in the Olympics and go home. Oh, wow. If they can't participate in that 2-hour window, they're done. Wow. So that's an unfortunate consequence. There's nothing you can do about it. It's the way the Olympics is structured. But it raises the stakes for athletes who end up testing positive.
And Ken, really quickly here, we have so many issues with these games. You heard now there's a typhoon heading towards Tokyo on Tuesday. Are these games just cursed?
Well, it's been an unfortunate cascade of events. And look, they decided to hold this event, the tournament in the summer, and we just finished the rainy season here, and this is what's going to happen. The Olympics back in 1964 are in October, which is actually one of the nicest months in the year, and they opted not to do that. So This is unfortunately what happens when you put it in this time period.
Mm-hmm. Taylor, one more question to you. Any final thoughts that you want to share? Now's the time. But, you know, Taylor, we just heard Ken say for weightlifters, for example, you've got 2 hours and that's it. Is that the case for you? Are your chances at a medal this year basically over?
Yeah, I'm completely out of the games now. Beach volleyball goes the whole length of the Olympics, but our preliminary round is only 1 week, and I had to make a decision whether I thought I could pass a negative test or sub myself out for someone who could play and my partner still get a chance to compete in the Olympics. And I didn't know if I could pass a test and make a negative, so I decided to pull myself out and let my team continue and someone else take my spot so they could represent the U.S.
Wow, what a selfless, agonizing decision.
Taylor, we are thinking of you. It is so incredibly sad. Hopefully you'll be able to make, you're still young, you can make it to Paris in 3 years from now. But in the meantime, we're going to be rooting for Jake and Team USA tomorrow night against Italy.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ken.
Taylor Crabb and Ken Belson there. Well, for more on the Olympics COVID cases, we have the founding director of the National Center for Disaster Preparedness and MSNBC public health analyst, Dr. Erwin Redlener. Dr. Redlener, thank you for being here. So these athletes have trained for years, as you heard, to compete on the Olympic stage. Should players like Taylor that you heard just now, who are asymptomatic, be allowed to actually play? He's probably just as good, if not better, as a COVID-positive asymptomatic player.
Well, it's a tough call, and it's heartbreaking to hear a player who's been training all these years, and this is the ultimate activity they want to do, and they've been so prepped for physically, mentally, and everything else. This is a real blow to somebody with those kinds of aspirations, but at the end of the day, from a public health point of view, we really have to isolate and separate people who are, COVID positive testing, even if at the moment they are asymptomatic. And the reason is that they could still transmit the virus to other people, unfortunately.
Doctor, Team USA's doc has revealed that 100 of the 613 athletes are still not vaccinated. It is a higher vaccination rate than the national average, but does that number still concern you, and does that put other athletes at risk?
Well, it concerns me a lot, and the reason is that we should not be having events or opening up businesses or other kinds of organizational activities without having mandated vaccine and being able to establish that and prove it. The problem is that the federal government and the state governments in the United States are not requiring people to be vaccinated, let's say to go back to work, to go to other events and so on. I think that's a really big mistake. And especially with the Olympics, when you have athletes and coaches and huge numbers of people supporting the teams are coming into Tokyo, gathering together in one place, no one should have been allowed anywhere near the Olympic Village without having been able to prove that they had been vaccinated. It's unfortunate, but here we are in a situation that could have been avoided, in my opinion.
Yeah. You know, Doctor, back here in the U.S., the Delta variant is just ripping through states. A new model says that we could be seeing triple the daily death rates by mid-October that we are seeing now. Do you think the CDC needs to reimpose mask requirements?
Well, the CDC, the federal government, has a great deal of difficulty actually imposing from Washington, D.C., a mandate in the country, because really those are decisions that are up to states and individual organizations. And so this goes for every guideline that the CDC puts out. They're guidelines, they're advice, they are not mandates. And I think now it's up to the states, it's up to businesses, athletic events, etc., to say you can't come in the door here unless you are vaccinated. That's what, as a public health person, as a doctor, that's really what I would recommend going forward here, and maybe we'll be able to avert some of those dire predictions of the models that might manifest in October or even November.
Those models have been right fairly precisely for much of the last 18 months.
All right, Dr. Redlener, thank you for your time this morning.
you were saying it's up to the CDC, up to the individual, up to businesses, but I think it is up to the individuals. Like we've implemented in my household the mask again.
Oh, yeah.
Like literally in the house wearing masks. But no, we've brought it back because those breakthrough cases are scary.
Yeah, definitely. What we're seeing in the last week is very scary. Yeah. All right, still a lot to come. Nancy Pelosi going to war with the GOP after blocking Kevin McCarthy's picks for the January 6th committee. Who will win in the search for truth? Our panelists have some thoughts.
And coming up on the Cross Connection, former House impeachment manager Stacey Plaskett and Joaquin Castro on this growing political battle. They join Tiffany. We're back now. Our focus on Capitol Hill and that House Select Committee. It is moving forward with its first public hearing on Tuesday without any members nominated by Republicans.
Speaker Pelosi rejected two Republican picks by Kevin McCarthy, prompting the minority leader to pull all of his picks and essentially boycott the committee. But now Pelosi may be eyeing new GOP reinforcements. NBC's Julie Sirkin is on Capitol Hill with more. So Speaker Pelosi is floating the idea of adding Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger as a member, also former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman of Virginia as an advisor. What's the likelihood of that happening, and what can we expect here from this first hearing this week?
Yeah, good morning, guys. So like you mentioned, Speaker Pelosi now has room to add more Republican members if she wanted to, because Republican leader McCarthy pulled all of his picks when Speaker Pelosi rejected Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, two of former President Trump's fiercest allies, for their role in the January 6th insurrection. Speaker Pelosi has not revealed her cards on Adam Kinzinger, the Republican from Illinois, who also was a big critic of former President Trump's. She did, in fact, meet with Denver Riggleman. He's that former Virginia congressman, a Republican. He actually told reporters the other day when he met with her he'd be honored to serve as an advisor if she asked, but she has not revealed her cards on either of those picks. Now, this all comes as we gear up for that hearing on Tuesday. It's going to be an 8-member panel as it stands now, all Democrats, and Liz Cheney, that Speaker Pelosi had named to the committee. Now, all of the Republicans she's considering, of course, have a common theme. They are critics of Donald Trump. They believe he did incite the insurrection on January 6th and voted to impeach him right after that. So as this hearing comes along on Tuesday, we're going to hear from 4 officers who were here on that day defending the Capitol. And this comes as they actually have a new boss. They have a new chief of Capitol Police. He was sworn in yesterday, Tom Manger. We spoke to him, and he said he's ready to help the department heal. Take a listen.
I was enjoying retirement, and if you would have asked me on January 5th, you know, you want to be a police chief again, I would have said, no, I'm fine. I'm enjoying retirement. But the events of January 6th changed that. As I was riveted to the television watching what was going on here, and it was the first time since I had been retired that I wished I was not retired.
Now, Manger has a big job. He also told us he supports the testimony of those 4 officers on Tuesday, which is a change in and of itself in Capitol Police leadership. He wants them to be heard, and he wants them to speak out at Tuesday's hearing. I was actually texting with one of them overnight. He told me he's a full bag of emotions as he prepares his testimony. He's actually still recovering from his physical injuries and hasn't been able to make a full return here on Capitol Hill. Guys?
Wow, just incredible. Julie, tell us a little bit more about some of those texts that you just got. I mean, in terms of emotion, is it, you know, trying to stick to the facts and appeal to both sides? Where is that rooted in?
Yeah, so those 4 officers, many of them have spoken out before. They've been on TV, they've shared their stories, but this is different. This is the first time they're going to testify at a public hearing before lawmakers here in Congress that they, by the way, have sworn to protect every single day. Their testimony is not yet ready. The one I was texting with told me he's still working on it. They were here late every day this week. We saw some of them as they walked out of the building. They're really, really nervous to tell their story and to be heard publicly in an official setting for the first time. Like I said, he told me he's a full bag of emotions, and that really struck a chord with me, because in these last few months since the January 6th insurrection, many of these officers returned to work. Some of them returned and had to go back on leave, not only because of the emotional stress they're under, but because of those physical injuries that they faced being pushed and crushed that day. Guys?
Wow, just incredible perspective and context there, Julie Sirkin. Thank you. All right, with us now is Cynthia Oxney, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. And also with us is political analyst Elena Beverly, former national deputy director of African American outreach for the Obama 2008 campaign. Elena, Speaker Pelosi has said that she made the decision to reject those two members in part with respect for the integrity of the investigation and with concern about statements made and actions taken by these members. I mean, Representative Liz Cheney told reporters that Reps Jordan and Banks essentially disqualified themselves. Do you agree?
I do. So she needed to protect the integrity of this process. They were actual witnesses. They should be subpoenaed actually to testify before the select committee because they were part of meetings heading into the January 6th insurrection, talking about ways to try to overturn the election results. This has been a partisan process for the Republicans from the beginning. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, in selecting the five that he's selected, he functionally put out there that he did not want this process to be successful. And so as we're moving forward, I mean, we know that we may have other members of the Republican Party join on the select committee, but it's against Kevin McCarthy's choices. And so I do think that Speaker Pelosi did actually make the right choice here by saying, the Republicans can go their own way. We will have Liz Cheney. We can potentially have Adam Kinzinger, and those are people who will be actually interested in finding the truth.
So, Cynthia, Trump called the crowd who gathered that day before the January 6th riot loving, in a new audio clip here released by two Washington Post journalists in advance of their book release. That book, I Alone Can Fix It. Let's listen to some of that audio.
There was a loving crowd, too, by the way. There was a lot of love. I've heard that from everybody. Many, many people have told me. That was a loving crowd. And, it was too bad. It was too bad that they did that.
So let's talk about the testimonies here from the police officers. We just heard Julie saying she was texting with one of them and about all the emotion that's going to go into it. How crucial will their testimony be?
Well, I think it sets the stage, right? It creates the video of them explaining what happened. It puts to bed the lie that everybody was loving, and it begins that process. The real crux of this is, though, because most thinking people realize there were not loving people there, right? Most people realize that those police officers were beaten and attacked and hit with sticks and bear sprayed, and most thinking people know that. So, but it does lay the foundation and provide the video to disseminate that information. But the key in this investigation is, how did they get there? Why did they get there? Who asked them to get there? Who paid for them to get there? Who paid for them to stay that day? Who paid for the bear spray? Did they get organized? Who did they speak to before? Those are all the questions that are more important, but a foundation is important as well, and that begins this week.
Yeah, I mean, Cynthia, certainly if you turn to some mainstream media channels, they don't necessarily agree with the fact that that day was violent, even though, of course, we have video and testimony to refute that. Cynthia, before we let both of you go, I want to turn to Tom Barrack. He once ran former President Trump's inaugural committee. As we know, he's facing charges of now acting as an unregistered foreign agent for the United Arab Emirates. He's out on a huge bond, $250 million. He's going to be arraigned Monday, and he's expected to plead not guilty. But if you take a look at this here, Barrack is the 11th Trump associate to be charged with a federal crime since Trump declared his candidacy in 2015. But technically, Cynthia, Trump is the victim in this case since Barrack is accused of spilling U.S. secrets. So could it spell any trouble for Trump?
You know, I don't think this does. I mean, he's basically charged with, being a spy. He's not charged with FARA that we've all heard so much about in the last year. He's charged under a different statute, which is basically an espionage charge, an espionage light charge. And so you're right. Essentially, the White House and the United States government and Trump are the victims of that he was a spy for the United Arab Emirates. I don't think this spells trouble for Trump. He doesn't seem like the kind of person who's going to try to deal some other secrets. They've certainly been in discussions with the FBI for a couple of years. So I don't think it does smell trouble for Trump. No, I do not.
Cynthia Oxney, thank you so much. And Elena Beverly, thank you to you both. Appreciate it.
Welcome back. Well, President Biden is back on the campaign trail. It is for the first time since taking office 6 months ago. Mr. Biden traveling to Virginia, speaking at a rally in support of Democratic nominee for Governor Terry McAuliffe. The appearance serving as a pivotal test of the president's political clout ahead of the 2021 and 2022 elections.
ABC News senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece has more. Shannon, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, we're finally seeing President Biden out on the campaign trail. I suppose I shouldn't say finally. We're only about 6 months in to his presidency. But, you know, the way politics works these days, the campaigning and the re-election and the midterms really starts the day a president goes into office. And so we are now seeing President Biden out there. This Virginia race, is quite notable. While Virginia has been a pretty solidly blue state recently, sort of making that shift from red to purple to blue. Typically in these off-year elections, the party that controls the White House does worse. So that's why you're particularly seeing President Biden coming out here in Virginia and campaigning for McAuliffe. But this is not the last we are going to see by any means of the president on the campaign trail. Heading into 2022, the White House and White House officials are very aware that come the midterm elections, like in off-year elections, the party that controls the White House often fares rather poorly. We have seen that with former President Trump, with former President Obama, and there is certainly an anticipation that Democrats could lose that very razor-thin margin they have in the House and the Senate. The White House messaging that they hope going into the midterms is going to be showing the infrastructure plan they can get through, showing the president's accomplishments with COVID and the COVID relief package. But a lot depends on what's going to happen the next couple months in Washington and Congress with regards to these big spending proposals the president has as to whether or not he's going to have that as a tool to sell going into the midterm elections.
Shannon, both Candace and I noticed at the same time there's either a light on you or that sunrise.
Beautiful sunrise.
And it certainly is beautiful. It's hard to believe. You do say finally we're 6 months in, but you get into that office and it starts right up again. Very little time to get things done. Shannon Pettypiece, thanks so much. As firefighters battle multiple wildfires on the country's west coast, they're also erupting around the world.
Yeah, known to have the world's coldest temperatures, some cities in Siberia, Russia, are under state of emergency with fires burning more than 30,000 square miles. The region experiencing some of the warmest, driest temperatures in more than a century. Well, joining us right now from London, NBC News correspondent Ali Arouzi. Ali, good morning to you. So Siberia is usually, as we mentioned, one of the coldest places on Earth. The temperatures that I saw today in the 80s, what's happening there?
Hi, good morning, Candace. It certainly is one of the chilliest parts of the planet. In fact, the region's main city, Yakutsk, is often referred to as the world's coldest city. And that's why scientists there are so alarmed by the intensity and the frequency of these fires, which they say is a direct result of climate change. Look, they point out to the fact that the land in that region has never been this dry in 150 years, that average temperatures there are way above what they should be for this time of year, and that's causing the permafrost to melt, which is fueling these fires. And of course, Candace, these kind of disasters go hand in hand. They have a knock-on effect. As the fires rage, the forest keeps shrinking, which means it can't mature, which it has a devastating impact on the ecosystem. And of course, those flames are emitting very harmful carbon emissions that is making the air quality in that region dangerously poor, both for people and for wildlife.
And we also saw some devastating flooding, as you saw, in Germany earlier in the week, and of course China, some horrific images coming out of there. How are they recovering, and are they likely to see this type of flooding again in the near future?
That's right. I mean, they are still reeling from what were devastating, catastrophic floods both in Germany and in China. They're trying to recover and rebuild after, entire villages in Germany looked like that they were washed away by the floods. In China, there were those very distressing images of people trapped in submerged subway stations, calling out for help while roads outside had been turned into raging rivers that were, gobbling up cars. And that, again, scientists say is a cause of global warming. More specifically, is dramatically raising temperatures in the Arctic. That's decelerating high winds there, like jet stream winds, which is causing storms like the ones we've seen in China and Europe to move much more slowly, dumping an intense amount of rain in a very concentrated area, causing these dramatic floods. And scientists say, look, if something isn't done very quickly to tackle these floods, to deal with this devastating climate change, this is going to become a regular factor in all of our lives. Cities and villages that are coastal will disappear, and this is a problem that needs to be tackled straight away and not put on the back burner. Already, the weather forecast is not good for China and Europe in the next couple of days. More rain is forecast. Here in the UK, where I am, last week the weather was up in the high 80s, early 90s. Now it's back down in the 60s. A lot of rain is forecast for the next few days. That's just not normal.
Yeah, not at all. Many of these buildings and structures over there in Germany surviving several world wars, but didn't stand a shot at Mother Nature in 2021. Ali Arouzi joining us from London, where he's been following these developments. Joining us right now is a professor of atmospheric science at Texas A&M University, Andrew Dessler. Andrew, thank you for being here. This is the second year in a row that we had, far as the situation is here in the U.S., smoke from the West that has traveled all the way to the East Coast. Between the constant massive wildfires and now the worsening air quality, will this be the new norm? As same question that was posed by Ali just there.
Yeah, we've had about 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming. So unfortunately, this is not going to be the new normal. The new normal is going to be a lot worse than this, because the warming is going to continue, and it's going to continue until we take action. And so, this is a small preview of what's going to come.
Okay, well, action is obviously not necessarily being taken. As you mentioned, it is a political thing. But you also mentioned that if there is no action, this world could turn into sort of like a Mad Max landscape, a post-apocalyptic wasteland of deserts. Why do you say that?
Well, scientists have been predicting for the last 50 years that if we keep dumping carbon into the atmosphere, we're going to get more extreme heat waves, more extreme precipitation events, sea level rise, ocean acidification, and then all of the knock-on effects from that. Because people say, well, we'll adapt. But there's so many things we have to adapt to. You have to adapt to smoke. You have to adapt to extreme storms like hurricanes. And it's not going to be easy, and it's going to cost a huge amount of money, and that money is going to come from our pockets. And so we're going to end up in this world with this degraded environment, and a world in which we are a lot poorer in, because we're spending all of our money trying to stay alive, rebuilding infrastructure, doing all the, running our air conditioners. We're not going to have money to do the other things. It's just hoovering money out of our pockets if we don't take action now. And we can solve this problem.
So a lot of people are going to say, hey, listen, it is late July, heat happens. On top of the wildfires, there is, however, another heat wave that is heading for the Great Plains, Midwest, as well as parts of the East next week, bringing some temperatures 10 to 15 degrees above average. This follows, of course, that heat wave in the Northwest that killed nearly 200 people in Oregon and Washington. Is climate change making these heat waves more deadly?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the most confident conclusions that we can draw from climate change is that heat waves are going to get worse. So we can be 100% certain that every time you see a heat wave now, climate change has made it worse than it would have been. And the impacts of this are not what we in the scientific community call linear. It's not like every degree of warming gives you a very small amount of impact. What happens is the warming occurs, and then it really doesn't have much of an effect until it passes a threshold. When it passes a threshold, the impacts get much, much worse. And as a world, we're passing these thresholds right now where the impacts of climate change are suddenly looking a lot worse because they're passing the ability of our infrastructure to handle them.
And Andrew, really quickly here, I'm curious about one thing. Obviously, all over the world, places are building new subways, and there have been subways built for more than 100 years. If you're a person, what should you do